The topic is Satanism, and our guest is Dr. Michael Haynes, Ph.D., who has helped law enforcement officials come to understanding about who Satanists are, what they want to do, why they want to do it. Where does this kind of activity happen? Michael, we appreciate your giving time today to talk about a topic that is truly a hot-button issue of the 1990s, Satanism. The big question when we say Satanism, what they don't want you to know, who is the they of the Satanist?
You're right about the 90s, Mike. Law enforcement people are saying that this is a crime that will be manifest more in the 90s than ever before in the history of man. And that comes from the legal community and various judicial areas. They're just now beginning to border on this. But we put in our magazine 3 basic levels so that we could get some kind of a handle or framework on total subjectivity. And we looked at the New Age movement as a highly sophisticated level. The New Age movement has its roots in hardcore Satanism, but a lot of the expressions, many of the expressions of New Age are not of a nature that these people who are involved in that movement would not get very angry where they call it hardcore Satanists. They don't believe that, they don't see the issue or the depth of the issue as compared to some type of objectivity, as you and I do, look at the Bible as far as our Christian teachings are concerned. So this is going to be a Christian perspective on the occult. And then hardcore Satanism, which is the Church of Satan, the Wiccan Church, various unsundry churches that have applied for nonprofit status with the Internal Revenue Service, a 501c3 status, and have received that. They've come out of the closet, they've declared themselves as a church, and then outside of the hardcore, the fringe level that usually hits our youth subculture, the fringe dabblers, we might call them, teenagers who are playing around with things that really are bigger than they are. So there's basically three levels. There's that sophisticated, which we don't deal much in as far as the magazine's concerned, and then the hardcore, and then the fringe. And my heart is really down here with these fringe level kids. Usually it's young people, and the strings are being pulled elsewhere.
So there are people who are getting involved almost innocently at various levels of Satanism.
That's right. That's exactly right. They basically don't even know that they're there, but there's certain traps and snares that's laid on the basis of entrapment. These people they go in with a plan. They're very aggressive. They're organized. They go in with a plan of attack, and that is to get the minds of young people. And once they can get that mentality started from either using free sex, free drugs, whatever it is that would pull young people in that are on that fringe anyway of not being accepted by their peers or at home, various self-esteem problems. And those kids are highly susceptible to Satanists as they recruit. And they're very aggressive. I'm talking about the Satanists. They're very aggressive, they're very organized, and they're very malicious. And they move in the direction of stealing kids.
What are some of the activities of modern-day Satanists?
Of course, the ritual is carried throughout the whole thing, even into the sophisticated levels. The ritual, a lot of times bloodletting of an animal. We have had penal studies from institutions that have come up with the fact that there are many human sacrifices annually, many that we don't know about simply because the type of breeder has brought these babies into the world and they have been used in sacrifices. Some of the major center down points for the occult in America is daycare centers. Young people are very highly susceptible as children as well. Some of the things that I'll be able to show you in drawings and various other things as we progress in this program, where teenagers and little children have been drawing out and acting out various expressions of hardcore Satanism and the rituals and everything that's liturgically involved. They're highly liturgical, Mike. This is not hard to spot because the paraphernalia is very, very open. But the problem is that very few people believe it. They don't really see this paraphernalia as anything other than Halloween or some type of thing that teenagers are playing games. This is no game. We just came back from McAlester, Oklahoma, interviewing Sean Sellers, and he's on death row because of Satanism. He is not an expert per se on Satanism, but he's on death row because of Satanism, and he knows quite a bit about it.
One of the things that Sean Sellers, in his own testimony that you have on videotape, indicated is that Dungeons and Dragons was one of the gateways that got him originally involved in satanic activity. How many other type of, what some parents would even conceive to be innocent games of their children, are really gateways for a child to become entrapped into Satanism?
D&D, or Dungeons and Dragons, is a fantasy role-playing game. There are many spin-offs from that. That's the oldest fantasy role-playing game, or the first ever to hit the scene in this country. And the spin-offs from D&D, it's not played, it's a game that's not played on a board like Monopoly or something like that, Mike, when you and I were growing up. It's not played out, it's acted out in the fantasies and the roles of people. Now, they'll take a piece of paper, identify their character, identify what that character can do, who that character is, what his limits are, right down to the fine detail, what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are, and they actually, in the process of playing these games under fantasy type of circumstances developed by a dungeon master, a certain set of circumstances for this character to perform, or young people actually are becoming that character because they feel like that character is everything that they cannot be. A lot of times the line of reality and non-reality is crossed by teenagers, and they actually think they're dreaming when they commit heinous crimes.
We've talked a little bit, Michael, about who the Satanists are and some of the things that they want to do or try to do to entrap youngsters in particular into the movement. How do they go about it?
They go about it by, as I said a few moments ago, Mike, a very sophisticated type of technique, a trail. Anytime you see any gathering of teenagers, either on a parking lot or in a teen club or anything where kids are, Satanists are there because they're recruiting. And they do it off the basis of the lack of self-esteem that a lot of young people have. But these young people who lack self-esteem oftentimes are high achievers. They're very creative. They are tremendously underestimating themselves, and yet Satanists are able to say with open arms, here we are, and this is what you need. You need community, you need family, you need relationship, and because you don't have it in the normal sense, you have it here with us. And they accept them at first right on the spot, just like they are. Some of the recruiting techniques are rather bizarre. All the free sex they might want, and they do that under the gaze of a video camera. And then it's used in blackmail against them. And they actually believe that once they get into this type of situation, they're usually in too deep to ever get out. They feel like suicide is the only way out, or death. And there are many satanic suicides, teen suicides in this country. After writing that book on teen suicide in 1986, entitled The Kid Killer, I found numerous teenagers who had been involved in the occult, just numerous numbers and numbers, up into the 300 range that I personally investigated and talked with their parents. Various other personal touches. I found that these kids were trying to Satanism, but felt like that there was no alternative for them other than death. And so that was an instantaneous thing, and they just took that route as escape.
Is there a profile, a type of person most susceptible to this kind of activity?
As I've mentioned, it's the kid that is a high achiever, and yet he has a low self-image. He may have been taught that self-image from a negative point of view. He's very creative, usually, or she, very much on the fringe of finding thrills with the supernatural, usually possibly from broken homes. Most of the time, the kids involved in Satanism have some abnormality in their background.
When a child gets involved in satanic activity, we're talking about children as young as what?
If they're utilized, they're young as daycare. And we have been on the trail of some child pornographers quite extensively in this country, because that's a federal thing. And usually that's the only place you can really snare a person, is the way they use young people for sexual purposes, is in that area of child pornography. But young people are used to satisfy some very quirky, bizarre sexual things and hang-ups that people have who are pulling the strings. I'll give you an example. It's no kingpin traffics drugs. They get someone else to do that for them. No person who's hardcore in Satanism does the things that young people do, and yet they have that reign around young people to the degree that they can utilize or use them for whatever purposes they want, because these kids are coming up power hungry. Satanism offers power, promises power, and upon that base, young people enter. They come in through free sex, drugs, all the drugs you want, of any kind you want, and crack is a first hit addiction. And young people they find themselves in too deep before they really realize where they are.
There is a popular perception in the public that Satanism happens in the large cities. It happens in the metropolitan areas like New York City, San Francisco, Houston, Dallas, Miami. Where is Satanism taking place?
I did an experiment for myself, not too long ago. I took a thumbtack and put a 60-mile radius around it, even in the most sparsely populated areas. And I came up with the fact that I could take that same thumbtack at any point in this country, in America, put it on any state, put it in any place geographically that it would reach a 60-mile circumference and find the same thing. It's not just in the major cities. It's usually in underpopulated areas where there's a lot of tree coverage, there's a lot of wide open space. The thing about it, when you perform a ritual, if it is sexual in nature, some of the teenagers don't want that, and yet they may kidnap somebody for that purpose. And the harder the screams, the more violent the screams, the more power that there is in sacrifice. And you can't do that, a lot of that in major populated areas.
So this type of thing is happening in what we would call heart of the Bible Belt, small communities,
yes,
rural areas of
heart of the
America.
Bible Belt, the buckle of the Bible Belt is happening right under our nose.
When does this kind of activity happen? Is it related only to times of the year in which we normally associate with the black arts,
No,
Halloween?
No. For an example, we in the Christian faith usually have a celebration around Easter. We have a celebration around Christmas, but that doesn't mean that we don't go to church every Sunday. Coven meetings can take place anytime. Usually it's a Friday. Most of the time covens are active when there's a full moon or any degree back to that or after that. They can meet anytime. Now there is a calendar that Satanists go by for some of the festivals and feast days that we celebrate are carried over, not the time frame, but are carried over in fashion with the Satanic calendar, which we have in the magazine. And law enforcement people are beginning to realize.
Our team here at FBCTI wants to always leave you with this. 1, if you don't know Jesus, we would love to share him with you. And 2, if you need healing or have a prayer request, leave us a comment below. And 3, if you're looking to change others' lives through a new career in counseling or becoming a crisis chaplain in your church or your community, head over to the website and set up a time to visit with us. Until then, be blessed.